production of a podcast. Here's Directorpiece Theater.
Oh, baby.
I don't know why I just coughed at the beginning of a podcast. And now I guess it's started. I don't
That's what you get for coughing. You cough, you get an intro out of that cough. That's what you get, baby.
I'm gonna talk for a long time too. Okay. What is this? What is this? You heard the guy say it. This is Directorpiece Theater, baby.
Yeah, baby.
This is where we're two directors, and we talk about direction in movies.
Yeah, we do.
And we usually try to find sleeper hits or things that we wouldn't expect that were considerably well thought out.
Yeah.
Or just basic theories about the movies.
Right.
That's kind of what this podcast is. Plus, it's just because myself, Abe Epperson, and my co-host,
Adam,
say your name.
Adam Ganser. Adam, it's me.
It's Adam. We both love to talk to each other.
We do.
And,
we're doing it in a
think
theater also. Don't think
Yeah.
the theater doesn't matter. It fucking matters. We're doing it in a theater.
We're doing it in a
I'm wearing a
theater right now.
tuxedo like a real maniac.
Yeah. I have a monocle.
Oh.
It hurts my eye,
Yeah.
though, so I sometimes have to take it out.
Yeah, you gotta squint to keep it in. It hurts.
For a whole podcast? It's tough.
It's tough on old Abra's peepers.
Yeah. So this episode, if you read the thing,
Oh, I read it.
because we all read the thing,
Holy shit.
I'm calling this, and I'm not sure if this is going to be the title that I keep because it's kind of long. I'm starting to give myself highfalutin titles.
I'm liking that.
Like I'm a real essayist,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm calling this one Clueless: Self-Identity and Subculture in Music and Art.
Boy.
Because when I watched this movie, it recently, to my surprise, it was just put on Netflix. I popped it on the old into the old browser, and I gave it a peeper. And it's been a while since I watched the film, but I always had like beloved memories of this film, and I was just like, let's see how this one goes. And I know it had a cult following, and I know it was like critically talked about. But I saw it when I was pretty young because it came out in '95, and it more or less that was when I was 10. So. I was right before, like, this is like a thoroughly, like, I'd say Gen X movie.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
And I'm right on that cusp. So it's like, it kind of didn't fly by me. I was aware of culture and stuff and knew what it was talking about, even as a young kid. But,
you're not an Xer.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't one that I was like, oh, this is sneaky smart. Turns out, in my opinion, sneaky smart.
Well, you're not an Xer. You're not a cusp. You're not even close to the Xers. You're 5-6 years removed from the Xers.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't get to be part of the Kurt Cobain generation. You're not.
What the fuck are you talking about? All right, fine. You know what? This is great.
Yeah.
This is so great.
Yeah.
It's like you're setting me up, dude.
By
the amount. This couldn't be better because you're fucking gatekeeping.
Oh, yeah, I am.
Fucking culture.
Yeah, I am.
By talking about how culture is defined.
I am.
This is gonna be great, and
Thank
that's
you.
what Clueless is about. Because. All right.
I'm going to
go through my theory, okay?
Sure, but can I briefly say...
Hit me.
I cannot begin to express my gratitude to you, Abe, for letting me watch Clueless again.
I didn't... You could have done that all by your lonesome.
But I wouldn't have. It wouldn't have happened. Had it not been for this show, I wouldn't have watched Clueless again, which I enjoyed so much that I was sending you emails about it the entire time I was watching it. I was sending you emails about and I'm surprised to learn, by the way, that this entire podcast is not about the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, because it sure as hell could be. It really could be.
Sure. Get it out of your system.
Nope, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna be like that fucking dance guy they got who's dancing.
We'll every 10 minutes we'll check in with the boss.
We can, because the grimace the lead singer has on his face the entire scene, it blows my
perfect.
mind.
It's a time. It's just a perfect snapshot.
It's so good.
Of history. It just tells you, oh, look, what was God up to in the 90s.
Turns out he was one of us.
Turns out
he was one of us. Just a slob like one of us.
Just a slob like one of us. Okay. So I have a theory that it's more of it's less of a theory in terms of like cohesive, like it's absolutely this. And it's more of like, I think that this approach was significantly well done enough that it makes this movie unique in a time where there wasn't movies that were doing this type of thing.
I agree with that.
And so that's kind of what the framing of the argument. I'm not going to talk about shots or like shot selection or angles or any like. Sometimes we talk about the craft of the episodes in that regard, but there's also a directorial craft that is just like, how are you going to navigate this very murky space that your movie is about, and what it's taking place, where it's taking place, and how people are watching it, and how people are, as a viewer, as a listener, represented in that media. And you got to that's your job, to kind of laser focus on the stuff that matters and disregard the stuff that matters less.
Yeah. Especially when you're going to make a high school movie. Yeah. Because a high school movie, you have you have sort of two tasks. You got to capture what high school is at the moment the movie comes out. But you also have to satirize high school. Exactly.
That's when you start satirizing things, because then you start having a point.
Yes,
correct. And it's not just a fun little thing. And, we like to have points. We should have points.
Sure.
And that's why Clueless is in really good hands with Amy Heckerling. Because Amy Heckerling, who directed this film, is a pretty goddamn solid director. And people don't actually know like her that well because she hasn't worked a ton, but she was working since like the early 80s and has been working until like, I don't know, like as of a few years ago, although she's doing a considerable amount more of TV. But in terms of like the things that you'll remember that she directed in film, mostly in the 80s, she did Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
That's insane. I had no idea.
She did National Lampoon's European Vacation.
That's also insane.
And she was like she was Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Like she was a writer-director. Like she didn't write Fast Times, but she was a part of like the creation of it, to the point that she was she did all the TV. There's Fast Times. There's a TV like series based on it and stuff like that. Like she was involved in all this stuff. So she was like the Fast Times at Ridgemont High, like one of the head creative people, showrunner, I believe. Look Who's Talking.
Look Who's Talking 2, right?
Both of them.
She did both?
She did both, yeah.
Wow. No, she did two. She did 2 and Look Who's Talking Now.
She did Look Who's Talking in 89.
You're right.
Writer-director.
Holy
shit. She did
1990
Look Who's Talking 2.
Wow.
And she did Look Who's Talking Now just as a producer.
Wow.
And then that's kind of... She hadn't directed since Look Who's Talking 2, which was 90. And then Clueless came out in 95. And she wrote and directed and produced it. And so this is like an entirely her baby. And that's just something... That's who we're talking about in this episode.
And it's a return. It's a return to high school as a subject matter.
Yeah.
Which was where she started her career. Because Fast Times at Ridgemont High is sort of it's actually a definitive movie for like high school movies.
Oh yeah, it's totally that's what I think she understands is what makes things definitive. And I would argue that this movie is better than Fast Times. But that's
agree.
Just me. So what this is kind of about is kind of a holistic presentation of piecing together what the filmmakers were trying to say and what she ended up landing on in terms of like what was going on in the zeitgeist at the time, and also from the perspective of us in 2020 looking at the film and seeing like how salient were these points, how prophetic were these things. That's kind of what I want to examine today. So I can't think of a more laser focused cultural stab to Gen X than 1995's Clueless, right? Like that was pretty damn scathing. It birthed, Valley Girls and such. Like it was pretty dunking on the youth, right? That's what it seemed like it was doing. Would you say that was different from when you first viewed it?
I was okay. So like the thing that I remembered about it, that I was surprised by, and it relates to what you're saying, is that it was an adaptation of Jane Austen. What I didn't remember
of Emma
specifically, right? What I didn't remember about it is that it was like setting up the main characters to be sort of vapid. Like I didn't think of it as it was supposed to be satirizing this culture.
That's the question.
Yes, that's the question.
So is it just bringing up Valley Girls and the glitterati and just dunking on them? Is that all this movie is? Because then that makes it like Pop Star or like another, like a different, like another comedy that's about like a culture in terms of like one that we like to make fun of.
It makes it just a Jane Austen adaptation also because it
also just makes it a romantic comedy that's just like kind of quirky or whatever. No, this thing is coming out from the get-go. It's scraping at the Beverly Hills like culture
big time.
And and the Valley Girl stereotype that it kind of birthed, like just think about like as if whatever, like these are things that wouldn't be in our language if it wasn't for this movie, frankly.
Abe?
Because Valley Girls wouldn't be even on the map. Maybe something would come along later.
Yeah.
But like this is what put it on the map,
Abe,
right?
I need you to know something. I hope my sister never hears this podcast. My sister was so excited to see this movie when it came out. That when she watched it, by the way, she's younger. She's about 4 or 5 years younger. So she was closer to your age.
Yeah.
When she watched it, she took notes on the language of the movie.
That's awesome.
Oh, yes. Now, she's a kid. She's a kid, so...
But that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's how it was seen.
Yes,
is that
correct.
People perceived it to be a standpoint in culture, and that's like kind of the divide I want to talk about.
It was a user's manual to kids. It was a user's manual for how to be interesting and fun, which is the opposite of what it looks like when you're watching it now. Right. It looks like it's supposed to be a satire, and it's like everybody took it like, no, this is fucking awesome, is what it is.
And what's kind of great about that analogy is that that's kind of what I think that this movie was. That's kind of what I'm getting to with my thesis is I'll just kind of come out and say
Thank you.
Like, by your sister doing that, that comes out of a tradition of producers and, I don't know, the people who thought they knew, definitely in music, studio execs, determining what they thought sonic culture was and applying it to demographics. Like, we all know about the like stereotype about that works for that demographic. We'll give them that sound and they're going to love it because they're kids from the suburbs and they love that shit. Like that kind of trope of a like businessman who doesn't understand the music or the movie or the culture dictating what the culture is for other people. That was so entrenched in how we did movies like this, teen movies in particular, that like people felt and wanted to go to the movies with like notes. They wanted to say, what am I supposed to learn today?
Yes.
That's how we self-identified as a culture. That's the place we're at. That's the scaffolding we're standing upon. Clueless comes in and says that let's not do that and let's give a message of healthy female friendship, identifying with self being wrong, and essentially finding out like cultures don't obey your rules. You just obey your rules. And then cultures are formed because we're all witnessing it. And that's how the definition of culture should be. It's bottom up. It's not top down. Ooh. And that orientation is what I think Heckerling is doing. And I think she kind of nails it. And I'm going to explain why, because she does a few things in just the framing of the movie that really sets that home for me. And so I'm noticing that the film's fascinated by things like music, ads, culture, art, brands, and identity. These are things that come up time and time again. It basically blows them up to abstraction in one sequence and then reifies it in the next one by making it like an actual story beat, which is different from just like, oh, look at that weird guy over there being weird. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, back to our story.
Right.
This is like, look at that weird thing being weird. That is now our story. Now we're going to go over there and see what makes them tick. And I think the cleanest elucidation of what Clueless and Heckerling is doing is the music.
It's interesting you're saying all this because now I'm thinking about the movie and I'm like, yeah, most movies like had a soundtrack, had art in them, had stuff that like were culture identifiers, like every John Hughes movie or whatever. but the movies weren't about that, and Clueless is about that.
It's about how those things define culture,
right.
and that's wrong.
And Clueless is like, again, the 90s kind of grew as the decade went along, more and more sort of self-reflexive, and Clueless sort of it becomes this like a movie that's aware of media, and like there's a kind of self-reflexiveness to it that you're examining right now, because it does consciously do all the things you're saying it's doing.
Yeah, it does.
It's interesting.
And I'll show why in a few examples. But I want to pick apart music first. And I found a lot of what I'm talking about. If you want to get really into depth, and if you want to watch like a great companion when you're watching this, is that there's an article that you can kind of find online. It's by a guy named Ben Esslinger, and it's called Clueless About Listening Formations, which is a bad name. And it's because it ends with a question. That's why my inflection went up. I don't know why he titled it as a question, but I think he's trying to do a thing where it's like, as if, or I don't know what he's doing, because the language is very much a part of what
grad writer being
about.
a jackass and trying to be funny. It's like, dude, just write your paper.
The article is very good. And it talks about how this era was a power shift, like in music, away from studio executives trying to craft and sell what they thought would like sonically work on adolescence, to one where the directors and producers and music supervisors of movies and albums and such place music in visual like TV or film contexts of those demographics. Basically, like what I was saying, like a more bottom-up version of identity politics. People don't remember that like 90s. When you'd hear a track, it would be co-opted completely. Like it would just be like, oh, we like that track, or it was created for this, like the 80s. Yeah. Play it over white people, you know, play black music over white people, or that. Not even that happened, because there's a whole other crazy amount of bullshit that dictates that. But it's like it was co-opted to into Hollywood. This is the first time that we're starting to see like. Which is crazy, because this is 1995. You're seeing like the music in a mainstream movie being represented by those subcultures that are actually there, and that's kind of intense.
That's true.
So I'm gonna argue that Clueless's deployment of nods to music culture and all these things marks a change in Hollywood's tactics about how targeting demographics and subculture works in popular films. It like really is a signal to this change. You mentioned Emma. I think that's kind of relevant because it's based on Jane Austen's Emma, and it kind of frames the identity conceit of what I'm talking about here when I say self-identity. The reason I think that's relevant is because they're both obviously plot-wise about a kind of scampish spirit Cher, or, you know, in Jane Austen's Emma, playing a matchmaker. They both take advantage of complex nuances of subcultures, and that they essentially over the span of the movie or the book they come into contact with. This was a trend in the late 90s, which I don't know if people knew this, but it was kind of funny. Like, especially in the late 90s, turning classic literature into teen movies was a thing. Yep. 10 Things I Hate About You is Taming of the Shrew. She's All That is Pygmalion. Cruel Intentions is Dangerous Liaisons. Yep. And my favorite, Romeo plus Juliet, because I mean, that's just my favorite film. Haven't I always said that in film school? I was always like, can we make a class about Romeo plus Juliet, please?
I believe I've seen you take a physical dump on a copy of it, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it's fantastic. So I think it's relevant because Heckerling either had to or wanted to show this kind of, and when I say had to, is like, there seemed to be like a call for these kinds of things. I don't know why, but they were like,
somebody's
can
like,
we be on like Emma?
Yeah, I mean, partly
like,
it's because
as if kids are going like, wait, they're doing a reimagining of Emma. Yeah. I gotta get to the theater.
Give me that sweet Austen. Give me that sweet Austen right in the veins. Yeah. No, I agree, but also I think it's because like that tells you the studios are like desperate for public domain content. Because by the way, this is like there's another Emma that gets made that's just Emma.
It's just
a couple
Emma
years
with
later.
Paltrow.
Yeah, like
it's like 2-3 years.
The thing that's
later
interesting about Emma as a high school movie is that like, so every Jane Austen movie Jane Austen plot sort of works the same way, which is the main character is very talented and wonderful and part of high society. That's very important. They're always part of high society, but they have this flaw, right? And the flaw usually is a thing they're not aware of, but because of a course of civil embarrassments, like societal embarrassments, they become aware of this flaw, right? And so Clueless is a really great idea because, like, you know, high school.
That's teenage.
Yes.
That's becoming an adult.
Yes. And you know,
realizing, oh shit, I am culpable for everything.
And the caste system idea is so baked into high school as a concept that you can do this, like, queen of the high school plays matchmaker and doesn't understand how she's hurting people conceit, because that's Emma, you know, like, anyway.
And I think Heckerling knows whether she was told to and made it work, or she wanted to do it. I don't know. I don't have her in the room. But at the very least, it speaks to, like, obviously she's going to play with this timeless tradition of being an adolescent, you know? And so let's talk about what the 90s, what that musical landscape and what Clueless's original soundtrack and source material that it's using for its songs really are. And there's a bit to unpack because there's like 44 songs. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll pick some ones that I think are very specifically telling of what I think the Clueless soundtrack is doing. So teen audio cultures in the 90s were like actually more diverse than ever before.
Yes.
They're not diverse relative to now, and they won't be in the future, but they were at the time. For example, look at 10 years earlier or so with American Graffiti, which was hailed as like one of the great like soundtracks of that generation. It's like a late 50s, early 60s teen soundtrack with like Beach Boys and such. This was a soundtrack for a very specific time.
It's boomer tunes. That's what it is. It's boomer tunes.
Yep. And so this is already in a model of how teen movies work, signaling to teens, to the demographic of teens, listen to this music and such. When you realize you have that scaffolding, I think Heckerling does an interesting thing for that. Because rather than identifying one, like Angus or something like that, another teen movie of the 90s, rather than, or even Empire Records, like taking a subculture and then putting it on screen and saying, here's what it is. Even Napoleon Dynamite, like the subculture of indie rock or something like that. Let's bring everyone into that subculture and understand it. That's not what Clueless is doing at all. The soundtrack is a grab bag of indie rock, alternative, Riot Girl music, hip hop. It's all they're all present in the movie, and it's a nod to the uptick in like things like hip hop and white middle class tastes. It's like reflective of like what the culture was starting to flirt with, as opposed to saying like, we are now hip hop. It's not that. It's not trying to say anything about hip hop. It's just saying people were listening to hip hop now, all around in multiple quadrants. And it's just like, okay, so let's reflect that. So you have like you have artists like In Vogue and Salt and Peppa, and they have Shoop.
They sure did.
Coolio's Rollin' with the Homies is in there. There's also sometimes a focus on rebellious and punk genres that kind of push an identity searching teenage vibe, like No Doubt's Just a Girl, or the Muffs cover of Kim Wilde's Kids in America. Lastly, several covers kind of point to the late boomer, early Gen X version of adolescent music, and I think that's her kind of having fun with it. Like the Muffs cover is one of them. Jewel covers Eric Carmen's All By Myself.
Love that.
You know, Counting Crows is in there, covering the Psychedelic Furs' Ghost in You. All mid-70s to even early 80s tracks. There's an additional score covering Radio's Iron Lung. That is like a cover of it, basically. The Beatles' Let It Be is in there. Like, in other words, they're generationally variant, and they're not trying to say like one is particular to any person.
No,
they just jump around.
It's interesting. Yeah, it is interesting because to contrast with Empire Records, a movie that I like because of the soundtrack. As I recall, you and I have argued about Sponge numerous times, Abe.
Oh yeah,
we love talking about Sponge.
Sure.
Clueless is not trying to put together a cool soundtrack. Like it's not like it's
nearly as no.
It's not like creating a record store. Like it's not even.
It's not saying here's the anthem of our generation.
Yes.
No, fuck that shit. Go home.
Correct. Like Breakfast Club is trying to do that. Even High Fidelity is trying to do that. But like Clueless is not doing. Clueless is just representing music.
Yeah, and even though I'm trying to separate like what we're looking at and the way in which we're looking at it, because like it is still looking at Beverly Hills mostly white people.
Definitely.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into that later about how she navigates that space and why that's interesting or why there's flaws apparent in that.
The closest,
but I do think that the framing that we do know, just looking at like the track list, is what the fuck is going on with this teen album.
Totally, which is basically what it was like to be in high school in the 90s. Because if you're at your dances or whatever, there'd be like you would fluctuate pretty wildly between genres. That was a pretty regular experience. I would say if the movie got close at all to framing a soundtrack, it would have been just a whole Mighty Mighty Boss Tones album. That's just right. Yeah. That's the soundtrack for Clueless.
Let's cut to the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. Do you have anything to say about?
My God,
no. Turns out they're irrelevant.
The grimace the lead singer has. I can't get over it. I'll never get over it.
Yeah,
his facial expression.
Even they, I have a part for them in my theory.
Thank you. I'm glad.
But it's later, so let's shut that faucet off for now. So I want to talk about Clueless and femininity.
Thank you.
In music specifically. First off, let's talk about Alicia Silverstone. She's almost completely an unknown at this point, at least theatrically. In 1994, she blasted on the scene in not one, not two, but 3 Aerosmith music videos.
Her.
Amazing,
loved her. Crying,
and Crazy, which I love those 3 films because that's the 3 words they think of, and they're like, so this is I'm Aerosmith right now, and I'm like, let's write 3 songs. Okay, I want to write. I don't know why they're British, but I'm going to roll with it. All right, so like I'm going to write this amazing, and then I'm going to write crying, and then I'm going to write crazy, because that's women, yeah.
That's women.
And it's just like, that's the fucking world we're working with here. And they thought Alicia Silverstone, who's like barely 16, like just being all the sex in those, and it's just like rough. What a fucking time.
It's really rough.
Amy Heckerling sees this, and she has interviews. She's like, that's when I saw her, and I knew I needed to do something. And I think she means like not like save her.
Right,
I think she meant like I need to like, all right, let's settle down, fuckers, because it's where everyone saw her. And she did something actually pretty interesting to me, because she turned a largely silent spectacle of her dancing with Liv Tyler in like a Cowboy Ugly bar, running away from their like literally schoolgirl outfits. Like it's not too far from what she's dressing in this movie.
Right.
So she's taking advantage of that. She's taking advantage of poor Alicia Silverstone being chewed up by all of this like nonsense that's surrounding her, because she's beautiful and young. And remember, this is like not too far away from the Britney Spears time.
It's like 4 years. Like 4 years before Britney
Spears. It's kind of salient what she's picking up on here. She realizes that she's this just thing to look at, right? And she put her into a complicated, living, speaking character in a film that challenges rock discourse and its idea about gender. Is there a more male gaze concept than Aerosmith starring Alicia Silverstone?
No.
And Liv Tyler doing sexy dances with each other? It's because rock gods are male, and Clueless has some words to say about that. So let's talk about Clueless. The most solid friendship in this thing is Cher and Dion, right?
I think that's fair. Although by the end, Brittany Murphy's character.
Oh yeah, but it doesn't start that way. Like that. This is not. It's unchallenged. I guess.
Yeah.
It's not. It just exists.
Yeah.
And it's named after 2 well-known female vocalists. Cher's work with Sonny, and Dionne Warwick work with Burt Bacharach. That's based off the spelling of Dion. I don't think so. I thought at first maybe it was like Celine Dion and they took the last name. No, it's Dionne Warwick. And they're both considered pioneers in the role of gender and creative control in music construction, because they both had male partners, but they were like equally important in those collaborations. And they were like that. It was out in the world that was true. So it was not just that they were doing all the work or doing half of the work. It was also that they were known for it.
Right.
That's important.
Right.
Because this is the first nod to Heckerling making us deconstruct ourselves, like show us something and make us deconstruct how feminist, queer, or minority artists are interested in like different properties of sound and visual palettes than those who are typically in more dominant positions. She chose to name her like strong relationship that is not challenged to people who had already kind of gotten over that hurdle and were symbols for this at the time. So I want to pack it with one song, though, is what I think the movie's actually doing. And it's over Brittany Murphy, like, who plays the character Ty, her makeover sequence.
Yeah.
It's Jill Sobel's Supermodel. Yep. People might remember, I want to be a supermodel.
Great song.
Which, by the way, if you watch the music video, is basically Jill Sobel goes to the same, like they cut her into footage of Clueless because it was made with Clueless back when they did that in music videos. So she goes to the same school as Clueless, which is like great. But it's also like, it's just Carrie, the movie Carrie. So she keeps getting like dunked on by like all her classmates, and she burns the fucking school to the ground. That's the music.
That's
video.
Fascinating.
I love it. Yeah, it's great.
Wow.
So the sarcastic tone of Sobel's voice, if you re-listen to the song, and especially when you watch the movie, along with the lyrics, it like reinforces and subverts the role of, I think, media and fashion in constructing glamour and beauty standards, right? I'm going to reference that paper I was referencing before with Asslinger. He writes that this reminds me of 1990s Riot Girl musicians and indie rock artists such as Liz Phair, who were interested in fashion and other things that were often labeled as, quote, girly, but sought to retain forms of agency by adopting ambivalent and complicated perspectives on popular and commercial culture. Sobel's choice to affect a teen girl accent with a particular Californian vocal uptick at the end of phrases combines with her own performance on guitar to simulate and endorse and satirize gender norms. That's kind of like what people were saying about that song, right? Now, I read another like paper on this topic, and it's just so I have all my shit in front of me. Marion Leonard writes in her book Rock Discourse and Girl Power, quote, often female rock performers appear to be labeled as subversive simply because they do not display or conform to particular modes of feminine behavior. To peculiarize such artists as subversive naturalizes the relationship between biological sex and feminine gender patterns. So basically, the reason I brought those two quotes up from this paper is it kind of reveals something very interesting to me. And I want to break it down basically question. So how does one satirize or subvert an outdated trope by showing like conflicting imagery or like basically what this movie is doing? How to use tone and music, but at the same time not reinforce the trope itself.
That's the tough part.
In other words, in this case, acting feminine and femininity. Or even simpler, how does one's voice become atypical without like buying into the quote typical part of that definition? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like on the one hand to reinforce
you're defining yourselves as an other,
right? Exactly, by otherizing a person or a feminist gender, you're sort of also reinforcing the patriarchal pattern that makes it other. It's very like. It's very Derrida, right? Like Derrida is this philosopher who makes the argument like every piece of logic has within it the antithesis of its logic, which I love throwing out to ruin a party. It's my favorite thing to do to ruin a party.
Oh yeah, it's
it's like taking a shit in a room. It's just that's it for that room. It's hard to do. I mean, and that's the challenge that Clueless has. I would say in every aspect of it is that like. On the one hand, it is satirizing high school, but by satirizing high school, it's sort of reinforcing high school. So it kind of walks this line where it's commenting on the vapid nature of these characters and their gender roles, but on the other hand, it's trying to distance itself from making statements that are reinforcing the bad pieces of it. And which is what you're saying, and I agree with you. It's especially interesting to me hearing this, to think of this being the person who cut her teeth on Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Yeah. Because like that's a movie where like the gender roles in it are totally a bummer and like really reinforced. Like the two female characters, one of them gets pregnant because she gets used and abused by this guy in this class, and the other one is one of the most famous male fantasy nude scenes of all time. Right? So like it's very interesting to hear this as the way to think about Clueless, because this director's had some time to think about that now, right?
Yeah, and I think that we might find that she was doing something more with Fast Times.
That's probably true.
But that's this ain't the Fast Times. I'm not prepared for that podcast.
Me neither. But like,
I don't know. But if I recall, it's not like she was like, yeah, male gaze pro. You know, like,
no. But again, if we're gonna make the point that satirizing male gaze also reinforces male gaze, then you have to say that Fast Times at Ridgemont High in some ways is a reinforcement of the male gaze.
That's very fair. And it's not the only thing. Like, Clueless also fails in a few other regards.
Clueless is a mixed bag in this way, because it's not always working at the level you'd like it to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's 1995 for you.
Sure
now,
is.
The first appearance, I want to talk about sidelining.
Yeah.
Like, in order to do the thing that I think that she does actually succeed in doing, I feel like, as always kind of happens, and it's a goddamn shame, the appropriation and strength of one subculture will often come with it the deconstruction or the sidelining of other cultures. And in this movie, it's definitely black and queer cultures. Because the first appearance of Murray, who is the Dion's boyfriend, you remember the actor, I believe he played Turk in Scrubs.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of fucking hilarious in this movie.
He's funny. He's funny all the time. He's a funny guy.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. I didn't watch a lot of Scrubs, so I don't know.
He is one of the best parts of Scrubs. He rules.
Yeah, he gets an intro, which is Salt and Pepper's Shoop, and he's got like saggy jeans, right? At a party, Ty and Elton dance to Coolio Rollin' with My Homies, right? Now, this is basically on par with like suburban co-opting of another subculture's stuff. It's just like playing the message, like in a white and upper middle class or rich construct, right? It's that the movie's version of a teenager is upper middle class white,
not middle class, upper class. Like, these are very
upper
wealthy
class,
people.
These Beverly Hills people. Yeah. The movie and the soundtrack kind of shows how identification of nuanced, like, white teen cultures is there, but and femininity is there, but it sidelines racial and sexual minorities. Another example of this is Christian, played by Justin Walker. Yeah. Who picks up Cher, and he plays Billie Holiday, Miss Brown to You, on his car stereo, because he's a fucking... I'm going to have a whole other thing.
He deserves a whole other podcast. He's fascinating.
He's kind of a great character. But like, my point at this moment is that because we soon realize that he enjoys Holiday and he loves the film Spartacus, it means that Christian is gay. Right. And so dominant discourses in mainstream filmic and TV and television represents gay male identification with female divas. That's one thing that's not great. The other thing is that, I don't know, it's a complicated sonic palette because the film belongs to Cher and her friends, but Christian is an other. Like, they're not like dunking on him for being gay, but they are saying like, okay, then you don't really have any place in this movie then, because you're not a part of this. So we've seen this before.
He disappears once that happens.
And I think that it's a very good point to bring up about this movie, that subcultures in their quest to define themselves often marginalize like gay and lesbian people, so that there's lines of division within the bubbles that exist outside the mainstream, because they're trying to define themselves outside the mainstream. So they need to kind of define what they are. And often subcultures do this to gay and lesbian people.
Sure. But what's so weird about it is like, it wouldn't even be like 3-4 years later when like the way to treat a character like that, which is also stereotypical, would be that he joins the girls. Right? Like that's what would happen in the pilot of Sex and the City, which is 4 years later. You know what I mean? So like, it's just so weird to me that like this guy, it's like she misunderstands that he's gay. Then he also is like this weird like Rat Pack clone. Although I liked the Rat Pack stuff. But like, that makes him gay. Okay, interesting.
He calls her when he first meets Cher. He's like, "Nice stems."
Dude, everything except for the fact that he reads William Burroughs is like pretty interesting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go into
fucking
that later,
hate William Burroughs
because I think that's something else that she's up to.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to detract too much.
But I wanted to talk about this out in the front before because I think that its strengths don't answer its weaknesses, but like there are strengths of this movie. And so out of the way, kind of like while Clueless is undeniably a heterosexual tale, like Emma is, it does take the emerging musical tastes and scenes seriously when journalists and editors and mainstream music magazines and such in the recording industry clearly struggle to make sense of music and gender. It doesn't make fun of them for liking music one way or another, so at least it's not doing that. But it is not a tale about black or queer people.
No, they're in it, but not. It's not for them.
Exactly. So there is a bit of co-opting it. But in Clueless, we're talking about girls. We're talking about women rocking, women popping in some cases, because like that's kind of like the terminology I guess I would use for like it's got a very pop sentiment. Like it's not just the rock and hip hop and such. These are all the like women can do one or the other, which is crazy because that doesn't sound like a lot. It's not, but it's much better than the conceit that still kind of plagues like women and rock label that is always like profiled the female riot girl. I think of like Tank Girl, or I think of No Doubt. Punk and rock musicians. There was another paper, Norma Coates writes in another paper, Rock and the Political Potential of Gender. She had a good quote, which was essentially kind of cutting through this and just saying rock is separate from women. Women are only related to rock by being allowed in. The in of women in rock has an aura of something that will never be complete, never fully integrated into the whole. I like that women in rock. That's just like I like that she pointed that out. And I think that that's still very true because we look at it as like, oh, it's diverse. Well, it does include a diverse and subcultural soundtrack, but Clueless rejects the sidelining of women, at least, as artists and listeners. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
And I want to talk about the visuals as well. Because I think the visuals, now I'm bringing in the visuals because now that we've kind of talked about how Clueless navigates the sonic space, there's something kind of interesting about how Clueless chooses its art style. And it kind of is also doing the same thing, is I guess what I'm getting
Can I just ask a question? I want to make sure I clarify one thing about the last piece. So, like, the challenging thing about Clueless to me is that Clueless is doing more than one thing at once, and therefore feels a little scattershot. Like when I watch Clueless, I feel I feel a little bit like it's not making defined choices as much as it's sort of incorporating and then breathing in and out a bunch of different things, which I think your theory has acknowledged to some degree. Are you saying that despite the fact that it doesn't have space for minority cultures and for gay cultures, that it does a good job of rejecting the in and women in rock? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
okay. I think I agree, because when you stack up all that music and what it is, it's pretty. It's a subtly it's thoughtful.
You realize that every single track that's at least kind of talking about femininity or white femininity,
and not in a stupid way. Like it's
deconstructive.
Sorry, not in a stupid way though. It's very like. No. Like it's not like, here, we're just going to throw some cat power on and we did it. It's a lot more thoughtful than that. No, it doesn't. And I think it's good that you pointed that out.
Yeah, I think that's basically what I think that the soundtrack does show.
That's cool.
Is that it shows when when it wasn't doing things like, all right, we're going to do Let It Be, or all right, like let's put on this, song that everyone knows. They chose these other songs that are specifically ballads that are like, fuck the establishment's version of defining.
Well, and see, that makes the fact that the only song that they discuss in the movie, is Rolling with the Homies, that I recall. They discuss Rolling with the Homies, which is basically the track that summarizes Ty being rejected by these like sort of establishment men. And that's interesting. So like there's a kind of correlation to that too. Anyway, just adding on. I just wanted to throw. I just want to put a little assist your way.
Yeah, totally. And there's also a sequence earlier where it's like clear it wants to do this kind of thing. It doesn't do it for all, like I mentioned, doesn't do it for everybody because it's trying to just do it with Cher. But it also does it all. When we look at Murray has that little bit where he's like, he calls Dion a bitch and then she snaps at him, rightfully. And then he explains like, I'm sorry. I know that there's like some like street speak or whatever he calls it, which is kind of like a bullshit. He's just like, basically the way I'm talking, it can be very eloquent. And I can say that, if you allow me to use this like specific type of language, I won't gender you and I won't do that. So it's actually kind of,
it can actually be indicative of a larger form of affection.
True.
It's fucking awesome. Yeah. It's like a grad speech.
It's not true, but it's like, it's because it's still like kind of SNL jokes. Yeah. So he's kind of, everyone's kind of magical in that way where they can suddenly be smart. Right. Which is kind of, let's talk about the visuals and like kind of like the movie progressing through time and like what you're presented with. So the title cards are kind of in this mod art color scheme. Like they're bright teal, purple, yellow. They're vibrant colors that I would say like smack of like Andy Warhol or Kitty Powers.
Yeah, sure.
You know, that's just something it kind of comes in later about like the late 1955s, early 60s of it all. The first segment is Cher and friends lounging around Beverly Hills pool. Their bikinis look like the Art Deco floral print, like patterned sofas, you know. The camera and editing strategies are like whip pans, quick cuts, inserts by clearly B unit directors, pump zooms. Yeah. It kind of, and Cher literally narrates at the end. You're probably wondering, but is this like an Noxzema commercial or what? The character's self-aware. Her life literally looks like an ad.
Yeah.
You know?
I thought it was fascinating to bring that ads. Up and never do it again.
So you kind of see where I'm going with. I'm bringing up Andy Warhol and and self-awareness, and her life looks literally like an ad. I think you know where I'm going. First 10 minutes shows up Cher's privilege, has her own personal high standard of how things should go, despite reality. Thinks of herself as helpful and intelligent, but we see there's obviously cracks in her, version of herself. I think you summed it up pretty well with, it's kind of like an Emma character. It's a Jane Austen character. She listens to her friend Dion complain about her boyfriend. She narrates over all of it and then builds up to a kind of canned response. Like, I helped.
Yes, so good.
She thinks she kills her debate presentation in her mind. And even though the class cheers for her like mimicry of like what a teenage interpretation of debate would be, while Sean just says straight up, no, you get a C. It's not good. So she drives around with a license because she, quote, needs something to learn on. But we also see her swiping Beverly Hills McMansion like private cul-de-sac curbs. So it's like she's bad at driving. So like we're just doing the gamut of she has supreme confidence.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a piece of shit, which I think a lot of people just took of dunking on these Gen Xers, am I right? You know? And then here we are, your sister writing down, all right, should I say what, as if and whatever?
That's
the thing. All right, so let me keep going. So the film is also highly color coordinated. That becomes, I'm going to talk about like all these art styles and why I think they're relevant in a second, but I just want to complete the rondo. Like in the short segment where Josh, played by Paul Rudd, and Cher drive in a Jeep, they both wear impossibly leather jackets, head to toe. The Jeep, everything that is a part of that whole thing is black or white. Like, there's no way they did this. It's movies. It's kind of like when we were talking about The Wedding Singer. We do these color palette choices, but hers, it's like, it's so, like, she has to, it's the kind of thing that we've done a lot since Clueless, which is like, let's make fun of, like, people who like to match their, I don't know, purse with their shoes, or like to match, like, my jacket with the space that I'm going to be tonight or something like that. Like it's trying to take the fun out of fashion.
Yes. But she also wears amazing clothes. Her clothes are so
all over
good.
The place. And it's part about what I think the culture that she's specifically lampooning, which is, part of it. That's definitely a part of it. She does this with all of the characters though. We fully see them like basic as their identity will allow. Paul Rudd, who's supposed to be kind of like, he's like the guy you would say who's like outside of like everyone else is a type, right? Does Paul Rudd have a type? Absolutely. That even though he seems like just a schlub, a guy who just wears t-shirts and such. When like not only does he play Cher's game of dressing in like leather, not for her, but just because of like movie reasons, like. That shot of his like black Dickies jacket over a 90s like thick black and white denim shirt and Ray-Bans.
Reading Nietzsche.
And he's reading Nietzsche, and he's at a McMansion pool. It says exactly what you need to know about Josh in one shot. Like he's just as entrenched in rich culture as Cher is. He just got accepted to college and is an open rebellion. Right. That's the only
He's
difference.
the philosophy student.
He's
version of what she is.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
So it's lampooning all of it, right? Now, the reason I keep bringing up like the 50s and the 60s and like the color coordination and like the colors and the mod art, the appeal to the ads and such, is I was surprised by the number of throwbacks in this movie of late 50s. There's a lot of clothes that are also retrofits of old fashions. If you look in the background of shots, especially the school, there's a few scenes where women wear like cardigans or cat eye glasses. The visual motif of dabs and like sparkles, that's also in the like the credits, but it's also on like the walls or fabric of the school, like in posters and such. If you look at the hallways of school, look at Cher's outfits in her closet as well. And look at the Mighty Mighty Boss
That's
Tones.
all I looked at. The whole movie. It was astounding.
They're dressed like 1950s to 60s.
Right, and
look at Christian.
They represent this like weird thing that happened in the 90s too. And this is like the beginning of it, where there was sort of that, again, the Zoot Suit Riot thing, right? Where it was like a weird 60s reboot. Riot. And they're the beginning of it.
Yeah. And then we have Christian.
Yes.
Who, for no reason, is from the 1950s.
Yes, no kidding. Everything about him is like he's a detective.
He's a private dick. So we're introduced to Christian, who has been framed already as like Cher's perfect man. He's basically a handsome 50s noir detective. And you know how in high school we all had that one kid who dressed like the Rat Pack?
I guess we did, yeah.
You know that trope, I guess? He calls her like Stems, James Dean haircut. He also says he dug her answer in school. And he's seen reading Junkie by William S.
I was
Burroughs,
immediately furious when I saw that. Like,
I love it.
Full-fledged furious.
Because you know what? Because it's so perfect. Because it's basically, for people who don't know, it's a one-hit, like... He only wrote one. It's semi-autobiographical, probably more on the autobiographical tale about a heroin
That's all he
addict.
ever wrote about was being on drugs.
And it's all he ever wrote about. And it was written for like a one-hit, like subway writers, 1950s. Like you write in the subway in New York, you buy these books for like nothing, and you read it on the subway. Like that, it was pulp, right?
I would argue that's all he ever wrote. But you know.
But that's how it was framed.
Yes.
That's the point. Like whether or not you qualitatively want to assess junk, this is not a book review podcast. That's what it is. That's what it came out of, and I believe who found it. I'm trying to remember.
Who founded the?
No, who found William S. Burroughs? Who's Ginsberg?
Ginsberg and the fucking guy with the road trip bullshit. Kerouac. It was the Beat Generation.
Yeah, exactly. So they're all beats and stuff. That's kind of important. Christian comes over later.
Yeah.
Because they're like having a date, and clearly Cher wants, to have sex with him. She talks about it after. But that's not what happens. But what does happen is when they're doing the date, Cher's dad's out of town, so he they're just have the run of the house. And he takes a look at the art pieces because, again, high class Beverly Hills, they just have art in the backyard. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how much money this lawyer made, by the way. It was astounding.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah.
Please keep going.
And he looks at 2 art pieces that are in Cher's backyard. He points out one sculpture, and he even knows the person who sculpted, and it's Klaus Oldenburg. And so I decided to take a look at who the fuck is Klaus Oldenburg, because I don't know shit about sculpting. And here's the cliff notes on him. He was an artist much like Burroughs, selling his art at like $5 a pop, usually in like, I'll give you 5 arts for $25 kind of stuff. And that's how he made his stuff. And he made typically like everyday objects lookalikes, like taking a woman's stocking and stuffing it with newspaper to look like something else that's also an everyday object. And the one that is in the movie looks a lot like he has a very famous sculpture that's untitled, but people call the sausage, which is probably not to Christian's gayness. Another sculpture he looks at and he says, oh, this is an older piece. See, traditional, a very important piece. So he's kind of just as fake as Cher, not explaining or discussing with her the importance, just that it is important. They also watch Sporaticus.
Yeah, I know, right?
This is from her voiceover. Because he likes Tony Curtis, who plays Antonionis. And the clip they use seems to be random, but it's actually a dialogue scene that Antonionis is having with a slave who served as a teacher for his master, and he's explaining what his use is. Antonionis ends up in that movie to join the revolt, seeing the quote worth of slaves as real people, because,
Sporaticus.
Sporaticus. But it's kind of fascinating to me that, what is she doing now? Why is it the beats? Why is it this? Why is it Warholian? Why is everything fascinated with ordinary things? There's a shot later of that apes 2001's Thus Spoke Zarathustra,
yes.
over a black wireless phone and with a low angle and wide lens. You know the shot I'm talking about?
I loved it. Please.
It mimics Kubrick's shot of the monolith, in which that film represents knowledge and a mysterious, ominous obscuring of the answers to existentialism in this shadowy monolith. It's a joke aligning Cher or the Gen X love of the phone as on par with the formation of humanity. That's a joke. It's not bad. But again, it's a small, insignificant, everyday object blown out of proportion or into proportion of high art, I guess is a better way of saying it.
Contextless. This movie has no, it's so weird that they made that joke. Nothing in this movie would suggest they would make a joke like that. And yet they're and then there's this, and because it's in the movie, it's the jokes that we do, in a sort of, what's the name of that art, like a Duchamp painting or something. You know what I mean? It's just,
Duchamp.
Yeah, very fascinating.
Yeah. Dada and stuff like that. The mundane. That's kind of where I'm going.
Thank you.
Heckerling is probably, I don't know why I just can't help but notice these things in movies. Why is she doing this? Why is she, what is the observation here? And then I started thinking about it. And then I realized that you have to displace yourself into where she was at the time of making this and where culturally everything was. And herself as kind of a boomer.
Right.
What are they trying to say about the similarities of the culture of the now and the culture of the then? I think that's... So I started to tug at that. And I realized, and after some research, you kind of realize that there are striking similarities to the art culture and the music culture of the mid-50s to early 60s and the mid-90s to the early 2000s. So the mid-50s to early 60s, it's kind of like the coming of age of the silent generation, right? Which was pretty well known for being addicted to unwholesome entertainment media. People are terrified about their kids being raised by TV. The artists that it created were considered a bad generation because they were beatniks that paid too much attention to mundane or ordinary or frivolous things. Is this starting to make sense a little bit more?
I think you're saying that this is she's sort of seeing the cyclical nature of sort of generational mundanity.
I think there's something in it, because why would she spend so much attention to it? I think this speaks more to, as a whole, the cyclical generational thing. I don't know about that, because that speaks more to the generation pointing it. Like, I think that speaks more to the generation pointing the finger and saying you're mundane and ordinary than the silent generation, which is just a bunch of kids that were just doing what they were doing at the time. You know, like, whether or not we think the silent generation sucks or thumbs up, thumbs down, that's up to you. But it's like a matter of, like, usually when people look at millennials or Gen Xers and they say they're like this, I think that observation says a lot more about the person pointing the finger than the actual generation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think the criticisms of that, of like what is happening in this movie, therefore are more revealing of the incompatibility of the generational worldviews.
Well, of course,
much like
that's one of the great shields that we have as Gen X and millennials, right? It's like the ability to be like, oh, you have a critique? Well, we have advanced enough in critical theory that we can show you how your critique is actually a self-reflexive comment. It's like one of our it's one of our great superpowers as a generation. You know what I mean?
Right. So you ask, Abe, what's this all about? Why are you talking about music? Why are you talking about art? Why are you talking about how generations think about each other? And why are you talking about this movie Clueless, which is about self-identity? Yeah. Well, I think it boils down to, while there's some clear shortcomings to this movie that I mentioned, and probably a bunch more that I'm not even aware of, there's a powerful stake in the portrayal of self-identification and femininity in this movie. Clueless embraces the timelessness of teenage self-identification, and it points out the errors of the past, and mainly that those errors are usually because they're being defined by the previous generation's definitions. It's got a more inclusive soundtrack, which is unique to the genre as a whole. It's got rebellious themes that don't necessarily prove it's a revolutionary film, but when you start to unpack its focus on specific art styles, about how ads, brands, all these things that we determine, identify, and define us, is set by people who aren't us, then what ends up happening is that you have to identify we're all a part of that same struggle. And the arc of Cher is determining who she is and how she must unlearn those previous assumptions not dictated by her. And then you realize that Clueless is trying to give teenagers kind of a North Star through all this bullshit. And it teaches things like acceptance, inclusion. There isn't really something that's important, I think, about Clueless is that it doesn't have there is a whole setup in that typical teen drama or comedy setup that is like, oh, now the friends are like, look at Mean Girls. The friends are now at odds because they're the thing that they swore would never destroy them, whether it was a boy or it was popularity. Now that is tearing them apart. They start that arc, but then Ty and Cher almost immediately say, like, let's never fucking fight again. That was terrible. Why the fuck do we care? That is like the movie opening up to a bunch of 10 to 18-year-olds saying, oh, you are caught up in this definition battle that's happening between this generation, and we're sorry. Because now you're being pointed at and told what you are, what you listen to, who are your friends, how you dress, what is good and what is bad. No, you define that. Their definitions no longer apply. You find it for yourself. And I think that that's the power of Clueless.
Yeah. And Clueless definitely, I think you're right. Because I think that Clueless, the power of it is not the power of most movies, which is like coming up with a compelling journey for a hero to undergo and then compelling realizations and stuff. Like the hero stuff and the emotional journey of it is not the most compelling piece of the movie. In some ways, I would say the movie kind of loses its way narratively because the stakes kind of end up being very low for the entire thing. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, like it's taking there's actually a quote that Rolling Stone quote by Peter Travers, the writer of the write-up in this, and he was talking about Clueless and another movie that came out in 1995 that was about teenagers, and it was Larry Clark's Kids.
God, I forgot that movie came out that year. It's crazy.
and he had a quote that was kind of contrasting, like, because that's a lot more adult-oriented film. It's about like how kids are being like teaching themselves to be adults. It's like a completely framed differently. It's nothing like Clueless. It's just hilarious. They both came out in the same year. And his quote was, "The materialism in Clueless is almost as scary as the hopelessness in kids." And I thought that was particularly telling, because I was like, really? I thought there was kind of a low stakes aspect to Clueless, but it's true that when you do watch it, it is horrifying. Like, you do realize that when they do 2001 and they show it over a phone, it is kind of scathing, but it's also the definition of someone who's a boomer determining what's important to a 15-year-old.
Yeah, that's the thing is, I wonder sometimes if Clueless is, because like we started out this episode and we were venerating Amy Heckerling, but I think by the end of it, I'm like, I think Amy Heckerling might have stumbled into something that was more zeitgeisty than she intended to say.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think that it's a snapshot in time. Like all movies, it's a snapshot in time. If I'm not talking about craft in this show,
you're capturing era.
I don't care. Yeah, you're capturing time. That's what you're literally doing. Actually.
Well, again, it's like Fight Club. Like Fight Club is a movie that's supposed to be. Yeah. It's supposed to be a journey of like sort of revulsion. Like, you're supposed to be revolted by what Fight Club is, but instead it captured this fucking white angst, Gen X pain that people totally lost the point of the movie. You know, like, we're not supposed to think Brad Pitt's a good guy, but at the end of the movie we're like, first rule of Fight Club is, and then we're quoting it to each other like assholes. You know,
I do think I don't want to take everything out of the power of Heckerling. Me neither. Because I do think that she's still doing that for, like, at least white feminists, or at least white women in general.
What's fascinating
is a better way of saying it.
I'm sorry, please.
Well, it's just she is making that observation of don't let a generation define you.
I agree with that.
I think that that's very clear based off all the nods that she's doing and trying to make us think about, well, when who was she being told when she was growing up? Who was making the rules for her? Well, the silent generation.
Right.
And now she's doing the same, but I think she's better than she was treated. I think in the end, that's what we're talking about, is we're talking about shades and shades and shades of generations trying to be better and better and better, until it's just only getting better.
Except for, I would argue that may not be true of Clueless. I look at this and I'm like, well, I mean, you know, we all come with our biases, right? But like, so comparing Fast Times at Ridgemont High to Clueless, Fast Times has like real human stakes in it. And by the way, it takes place in the same location. It's still Southern California. It's like, 13 years earlier, but it's in Southern California, like right in LA. And it's in that movie, the stakes are emotionally very high, and there's a lot of problems, and it kind of wanders between people's lives. And Clueless, while definitely locked into Cher's point of view, sort of wanders through its problems, and I don't hate that about it. But like, again, even like Alicia Silverstone's dad, right? The dad in this movie, right? Who Dan Hedaya is the name of the actor. Dan Hedaya. He's been in a billion things. This is one of my favorite roles he was ever in.
He's fantastic.
He's so good. Yeah. Like, just when he comes in and Brittany Murphy's in his chair, and she's like, "Hi, nice to meet you." He's like, "Get out of my chair." It's amazing. Yeah. He's just horrible.
I also like the character choice of like, he's more happy with her arguing into better grades than if you got the grades themselves. To the point of, he says literally that line. Like, he knows that's what he means. Like, that's what you mean? It's like, that's almost like an observation you make on someone's, like, he just cares, like, he doesn't care how I get the grades. This fault on him. This is how they love each other. This is how
it's so good. Like, it's very funny.
Such a weird
but again,
it
underlines the fact that these people have no problems and no substance. Like, they're very vapid because the only thing that matters in Clueless at the end of the day is, like, did they look good? Did it look right? Did it come together the way that pleases you, art, like, aesthetically? Like, you made so many good observations about that.
Because with the Paul Rudd arc, like, there's at least something to be said about, like, she realized, like in her Dark Night of the Soul, where she's walking around town and not understanding things, right? She comes to the realization that she loves Josh. Because it's the only time in the movie that she defines things as not, like, once she starts to go after the midpoint into like a recursion into herself, where she's like, I'm just going to try to do nice things.
Right, I'm going to try to be
and
actually
that's
nice.
all she wants to do. And it's like I'm not even trying to like get points
but she
for
does
it. Like, hey, do you want to come to my party? This stoner that I, like was dunking on this whole movie. Do you want to he still thinks that I would want to go to his party. Yeah, I'll go to your fucking show or whatever. Yeah, it's just like she goes and watches like that. I think we don't want to be missing the message that, yes, it's doing the very candy-coated Hollywood thing of just like, yes, involve everyone and everything will be fine.
No. I do see I actually do give Amy Heckerling some credit here, because you're making a bunch of great points. This is the hero's journey. We're following it, right? Like, now she needs to learn to actually care about other people, not just care about people just formally care about people, right? Which is what she does at the beginning of the movie, right? And that's Emma's journey, by the way. Emma's journey is she thinks she's helping people, but it's actually a selfish act. And then she realizes, I have to do something very different and make some sacrifices to help people. And so Alicia Silverstone's character is, in theory, learning I have to make sacrifices to help people. But the problem is that she gets rewarded instantly and easily for everything she does, even at the end. Like, even the love relationship that she has with Paul Rudd's character is very easy. There's no real tension in it. Yeah. It's easy for both of them.
Unbeknownst to camera, he came to the same realization.
Right, he came to the same realization. And by the way, they're step siblings. That's fucking weird. And like, it's totally unaddressed. And it's not that weird. Be unaddressed.
It's not that weird.
It's weird, dude.
It's not that
fucking weird.
No. All right, then you think that, like, okay, so do you think that if you, let's say, knew someone from, like, fifth grade or something like that, and you're friends forever, and then one day when you're, I don't know, 19, decide, you know what, I kind of want to date this person. Is that weird?
No, because they're not the same situation.
But like, you know how their steps, they're not related.
Let me put it to you this way. I'm not saying they're actually related. That's not the part that makes it weird.
What makes it weird?
I'll tell you. Thank you for asking. What makes it weird is, imagine both of our parents got divorced, right? My parents got divorced, your parents got divorced. Then imagine that your mother and my father decided they were going to start a relationship and they got married, right?
Yeah.
Now, that wouldn't be wrong morally necessarily. Like, not technically.
But I didn't know you. I've only known you for like a year.
But that's not the thing. That's not it, though. They've known each other for longer than that.
That's what Clueless is. No, they've known each other for a few years.
But again, it's weird because like, the relationship is totally context driven, and that context is a weird place for this relationship to start. It's weird.
Yeah. I think he's only there for, like, they say it at the beginning. He's only there. They've known about each other, but he's only lived at that house at the beginning of the movie. He like basically moves in. He's only there for college. Like, he lives elsewhere.
I think the movie wants to kind of glaze over it, and it gives us enough that if we want to glaze over it too. It is kind of weird
also that the movie doesn't know what it wants to do, because like, we're talking about this before. It does this weird thing where it says at the beginning, or rather at the very end of the movie, after they kiss, right? And then it's there's a shot of a wedding, and it's the weddings between the teachers that they set up, that Cher set up at the beginning of the movie, and then she says, "No, not us. What are we, from Kentucky?" Right. Which is a dig on like incestual Southern relationships. And then the movie ends with them kissing again, and it's even more of a kiss. It's like, oh fuck, this is a fuck kiss. So it's like the movie doesn't even know. Is she embarrassed by this? Oh no, it sounds like clumsy. She's not. Wait, no, is she embarrassed by this? Yeah, it's clumsy, and I think that's. I think that's kind of like a lot of this movie. It's kind of clumsy.
It is clumsy. You know what it's like? It's a little bit like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, very famously, Upton Sinclair wrote the novel The Jungle to make an argument for why workers needed to unionize and we needed socialism. So Teddy Roosevelt, I'm saying this for the audience, I know you know. So Teddy Roosevelt reads it, right, while he's eating some meat packing like sausages or whatever, because the book is about the meat packing industry, reads it and feels ill knowing how his food is made, and so he starts to order food packaging reform, which is the opposite thing from what Upton Sinclair wanted. And he said very famously, it's like I aimed to hit America in the heart and I hit their stomach, right? And I think that's what happened here with Clueless, is that like Heckerling thought she was making a really incisive satire, and maybe did make a satire, because at the end she makes these jokes and then undermines them. But America totally fucking missed it. Like, we just missed it altogether. We didn't see any of it. We were too busy saying as if and whatever to each other. You know, we didn't see any of that shit.
Yeah.
Like, again, and I'm not trying to make fun of my sister. Every fucking buddy was saying this.
No, wasn't
everybody was saying it, man.
Sure.
It took Austen motherfucking Powers for us to stop quoting this movie to each other.
Right.
It's the only way.
Right.
So, like, I think Heckerling came in here with like some smart, incisive ideas, and like kind of did a lot of undermining things, but didn't do them super clear. And then we were just like, "Fucking, movie's hilarious," and that's it.
And don't forget that like the conceit, the topics that she wants to talk about are so hard to talk about.
They are.
There is no doing like. If your goal is to let's make a movie that really encapsulates culture, you're fucking dead already.
It's impossible.
You're dead. It's impossible. So don't expect that, like, and moreover, if people are expecting my thesis to have like that like nice little end to it, like it's gonna be as unsatisfying as you probably find Clueless, you know, because the whole idea is to start a weird conversation, and because it's only weird because someone else is making it weird and you feel obliged to feel embarrassed about talking about it in that way. It's kind of like that. Like, she wants to point us at stuff of like, oh yeah, it's funny to make fun of these people, but they're real people. You know, it's like every time we do that thought, it's like, oh, all right, yeah, but I mean, it's just like characters. Yeah, but Alicia Silverstone is right now being leered at by an entire country, and she's like 16.
Can we briefly talk about her a little bit? I mean, I understand we've gone over, and it's not related to your theory.
It's fine, man.
Dude,
she is. I love it.
Incredible in this movie, and I don't mean.
I can't believe she like, no one knew.
She is a star in this movie. Like, she owns
kills
the world in this movie. And it's hard to tell.
Cher is amazing.
Sorry, go ahead, Abe.
No. I was just saying
she's
Cher's
amazing. It's hard
That's
to
all.
it's like sometimes it's hard to tell if the actress is genuinely the same level of vapid as Cher, because of like how genuinely she believes every bullshit thing she says. It's incredible.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things that it makes me think about, like how I don't know the answer to it. I don't know Alicia Silverstone.
I saw an op-ed on her.
But she was very young when she made this movie, so who knows what was going on. I don't even.
Who can say it's almost impossible to make something this successful and continue having a successful career as an actress after this.
Right. That's my I think she knows.
And she became a star for reasons that aren't the best reasons. But I just want to take a.
She was in a Batman.
What's that?
She was in a Batman. She was in a Batman,
but that really hurt her career, I think, and her self-esteem.
It hurt everyone's.
But I just want to say, like, taking a step back and not thinking of her as a sex object, obviously, but looking at her as a character and as an actor, like, she is unbelievable in this movie. She is, like, she's doing a thing that's so underappreciated. Like, it's so hard to be dumb and genuine in a way that's fun and doesn't feel rote. And she is crushing it.
Yeah, she's she totally is the character. Like, in terms of like inhabiting the space and in front of camera. It's a great performance. I think there's a lot of really good performances in this.
I agree. I wish they'd given a little bit more.
I think Brittany Murphy's also fucking where'd you come from? You fucking nailed it. I love that she's like playing both sides at the beginning when she's like, got any herbal refreshment? Right. You know, like she's immediately like, all right, cool. We're now friends. All right, cool. You guys got any weed? Like it's just right out of the gate. Just like she doesn't even know their names. It's fucking great. That's why I think it should feel like you're tiptoeing around this stuff, because you should feel like Cher, what she's doing with the stoners and all of them. Like she's saying they're worthless. They're not worth anything. Fuck them. They're vapid, you know? And so you can't be seen with them and you should make fun of them, kind of. She's not like Mean Girls going out of her way.
It's done
to,
more
like,
gently.
Spoil their day. She just chooses that they have no worth. And by the end of the movie, she's like, nah, that's stupid. Why am I doing that? Why? Probably because everything is setting me up to, like, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to be this type of success thing. So she says that in her Dark Night of the Soul. She's like, the only thing I realize is I'm literally clueless. Like, I'm just so damn clueless about all this stuff. I'm not thinking about anything. Yeah, you're not thinking. You're a child. That's fine.
True, but like some movies, that would be a very dramatic moment. Like
oh yeah, if it was an adult who's not thinking, that's a huge change. Again, I think this is representing the change that we all do when we realize that we like our actions have responsibilities.
Well, we have a similar arc in The Breakfast Club with the most popular girl. She has a similar realization that like these casts and stuff she's created are fake and she shouldn't be doing what she's doing, and it's much more emotional, and more. It seems like a more profound change. Like Alicia Silverstone's change, it's hard to believe it because you just know that after she and Josh start dating, she's still going to be like arguing for better grades, as though it's not an insane thing to do. And her dad's still going to be an absolute monster. And like, they're going to keep being rich forever. You know, like, you just worry about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I keep coming back to the, like, I love that like critics knew to look for like the Marion Leonard's, the discourse that she talks about peculiarizing artists as subversive, naturalizing the relationship between the thing that they're considered peculiar at.
Interesting.
The idea that female rock performers labeled as subversive because they're just not being feminine. And it's just like, that's fucking stupid. I think that's where Clueless is at its best. When it's trying to say, like, that doesn't mean that I'm going to satirize gender norms in that way.
Clueless is ultimately...
And I'm going to do what I want to do. You fuck off with your definitions.
I agree, although I think that we're also reading it in just a little bit because, like... because I think that... I think it's more about that it's not clear than it is that it's actually taking a stand like what you're saying. Like, I actually think that part of the reason that take is possible.
Why do you think I don't think the obligation is on the movie to make that stand.
I think it is. If you want to be a good filmmaker, it is.
Well, yeah, if you want to make... I think she's clear about her message. It's just that her message isn't the clearest. Because, like we're saying, you can't make a culture movie. So I don't think it's fair to her to be like, did you answer all the problems, though?
Well,
like, that's basically what you're more or less asking.
No, I'm asking her to make a definitive... I'm asking her to make a movie that has takeaways that are clear.
Yeah, and it's because she's saying, well, what's your definition of clear?
No,
then?
Because that's the kind of question that you ask when you don't want to answer a question. It's not the way that...
I think it also has value.
I'm not saying it doesn't have value. I just don't think that's the way a director would answer that question, because it would be about, I don't want to answer that, so here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to subvert it.
Well, I don't give a
I know what you do, baby. I know what you're going to do, baby.
I'm not saying me. That's what I'm saying. The movie.
I don't think it is. I think what's happening is that I think Heckerling's trying to make a more clear satire, and it's not working. That's my thought. Is that
I think
I do think she did all the things you said, but some of them are other people.
I think there's
pulling these.
I think there's satirization and there's the comedy that she's doing, which can is a lot of what we're talking about, how it lands flat. But the message of the movie is completely different. And those hodgepodge of things don't have to be.
No, they don't have to be. So, but then what you're arguing is like, so in some ways, Heckerling is kind of submarining our expectations for how a narrative works to make this other point that none of it matters.
Well, I mean, isn't that what redefining a genre is? Isn't that how she didn't do, like, how it's a reimagining of Emma? Like, how else is it not just a redoing? Well, I think
that's what it was trying to do. I think it was trying to do a redoing of Emma, but like, it had some writing problems and it had some directing problems where the stakes didn't really play because Beverly Hills has no real stakes. Like, I think she's like, I'm going to really lampoon these Beverly Hills people because they don't have any problems.
I don't think the size of stakes matter.
Oh, I think they do. Of course they do.
I mean, they do in some things, but like, it still can be true even if it's just about like a teenage girl learning about.
I agree.
Like how she defines herself, or any teenager doing that for that matter. That's not the biggest stakes, but it's still like,
I'm not saying they're not big stakes because in the universes in the universe of all things that happen, those are small problems. I'm saying they're not big stakes because nobody feels that big about them. Like, they don't matter within the context of the movie that much.
Yeah,
that's comedy. Kind of, but like, so just to contrast, let's use a movie like Step Brothers, which has the stupidest fucking stakes in the world, right? Like,
yeah, it's not satire though.
No, okay, so we have to have
it's not a satire. That's just a comedy. We're talking satire.
Well, you're saying that's comedy, and I'm saying, well, yeah, but comedy does melodrama all the time. That's like what it.
Yeah, that's comedy. I don't understand what the problem
is. You're worming around here. You're worming around here with this.
No. Comedy is separate from satire, correct?
Yes, they're separate from satire. That's correct. But
yeah, and so sometimes you do things for comedy, sometimes you do things for satire. This is a satire.
I disagree with that broad stroke generalization about this movie because it's not always a satire. Sometimes it's just a comedy.
It has comedic moments, yes, but it is a satire.
Well, okay, so all right, then here we go. So if it's a satire,
like, satire uses comedy, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like a method,
sure.
Right? Is how I see it.
If you're saying it's a satire, do you think that it's successful as a satire?
I think it's successful. Yes, I do.
And it's successful by showing how. Your argument is effectively like it's showing us that like these margins and labels you're trying to put on us are meaningless.
They're defined by a generation who doesn't know what they're talking about.
And the generation is the boomers.
The generation is a previous generation.
Right. So when he reads William Burroughs and when we see Friedrich Nietzsche and when we hear these like
I was just pointing that out as a parallel of like here's what Amy Heckerling was probably looking at as the like, well, what were you like when you were young, Mom and Dad, telling me how I'm supposed to be?
Well, it's interesting because I
poking fun at that, or it was just a funny joke. I just thought she was overly infatuated with the late 50s and the early 60s. I thought she was
trying to. Okay, see, when I read that, I'm reading like a sort of. I actually kind of agreed with what you're saying until this moment, because like what you were saying before was like. That like the generation improves until the point where they keep getting better and better, and like my objection is not that the generations get better, but it's that because their lifestyle gets better, the problems and therefore the meaning get reduced. You know what I mean? Like that's how I feel about Clueless. Clueless is ultimately about being vapid and meaningless.
Yeah, but also that's growing. Like I guess it's not. Were you saying that, like me saying, like generations getting better and better, but that's what's happening, or that's what ought to happen? Because that's what I was saying. That's how it should work. Is that we should, with things like Clueless and things that are after Clueless, like our generation and the next generation and the next generation's version of whatever Clueless is needs to be making these stands to slightly improve things. That's what I think should happen, and I think Clueless does succeed in that.
About making stands?
I do think it has all these problems because it inherited all these fucking problems because the world inherits
that part's true.
Problems because time is... Yeah, exactly. So the definitions battle that's the thing that I think it is satirizing. It's trying to say, oh, you want a teen movie to be like this? Nope. Oh, you think that rock star gets to define the career of a young teen? Nope. You think that this is how like this genre does a female companionship arc? Nope. Like, it's just constantly saying this. I refuse to be that type of movie.
That's in okay. I think maybe
I
do.
Very
maybe
Jane Austen. That's very Jane Austen.
Maybe I do agree with that, but I think where you and I probably part company is that it has to be something though. Like, I don't think it's saying no, I refuse to do stuff makes it good. I think it's like, okay, sure, but then what are you? Like, be something.
But that's you're asking for a definition.
I'm asking for the narrative experience of it being a thing. Yeah, I agree. I am doing that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I don't think that, but what let's take it in the context of what movies are supposed to be, right? Like, they don't have to be anything. That's a very simple answer to that question. They can just be a thing to enjoy. And I'm not saying that that's what Clueless is. Clueless is, to me, a satire that has a point. But the fact that we have to like set it up to like, yeah, but how good of a satire is it really? Because this is how satire works, is to me the thing that like the motivation behind Clueless would rebel against. It's an open rebellion to those definitions. It's like, the person who found herself is not anything like me. Like, have you seen Amy Heckerling? She has no knowledge about like Valley Girls, but I assume she knows what it is to grow up as a teenager, in like
she might have grown up in this. So, she might have grown up in the Valley Girl culture. That's totally possible.
Yeah, it's possible, but
I mean, she made 2 movies about it.
She's a boomer. Yeah, she did, but that's just that generation's version of it is all I was kind of saying with that. To me, it's Clueless is just saying, you Valley Girl or not, whatever, doesn't really matter. Don't allow other people to determine how this works. Searching yourself and find an answer of what you think matters, and once you find that out, that will set you free.
Is that what you think?
That's all it's saying.
So you think that's what Cher does?
I think that's what Cher does. Yes, that's how the arc is. I mean, her Dark Night of Soul is literally her walking around town thinking, why am I getting this wrong all the time? And her realization is that she just doesn't. She's not equipped for that. And the second that she's saved is when she realizes, oh, here's things that I do want, and I'm now actually self-aware about what I'm doing. Now I can just act upon those impulses because I want to be a nice person, so I'm going to start being a nice person. I love Josh, so I'm going to go and try to be with Josh. And then the movie. Yeah, but
the part where I'm having a hard time getting on board with this, and I don't want to weigh everybody down with getting the nuances of this right.
No, I think it's a fascinating conversation. I'm not bothered by it.
I just didn't want it to be tedious. So, like, the part I'm having trouble with is that, like, I don't get from that like she's rejecting other people's labels. I do get the thing that you said about her realizing, like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to be. And I am not equipped to do it. That part I agree with, but like I guess by extrapolation,
the labels thing.
Hang tight.
Well, it's because it's
high school. So I guess by extrapolation, because she has no clear direction from anywhere. She's rejecting other people's labels, but it's not like it's a rebellion against some other labeling force.
I think no. I think so, because she's determined. Look at the stoners. She looks at them, and whether she defined it herself, everyone does it. They ignore that part of the knoll, because that's where all the stoners are. They're burnouts. Why? Because that's how it is. That's the definition she's trying to pick apart. The times that we go like, well, we can't do anything about it because that's just how it is. That's the definition that Clueless wants to go like, fuck your definition of that. What do you mean when you say, like, I don't think that those people are important. I've decided that they're important.
Yeah,
in my own head, I've decided. So for me, they're important.
I think
that's what
I think maybe this is like parsing it out a little bit, because like to me, I think another high school movie that's doing exactly what you're saying is It Can't Hardly Wait. I've talked about it on a different podcast, but like Can't Hardly Wait is all about the fiction of the caste system, right? Like none of it matters. And there can be a party where it all sort of comes crashing down. But like one of the things that makes that movie more clear about it is the fact that once the party's over, it comes back. You know what I mean? It comes back. And in this movie, it's like Alicia Silverstone makes a decision. It kind of has a self-realization. But again, as you said, it sort of also reasserts the meaninglessness of everything, because she gets rewarded for anything she does. If she makes a vapid decision, she gets rewarded. If she makes a moral decision, she gets rewarded. If she gets that's why I think Peter Travers is so horrified by the materialism, is because the movie only
why
believes in that. Why do you think
she gets rewarded She doesn't get rewarded for everything. She fails her tests. She has a dark night of the soul.
She doesn't fail the test. She gets a B or an A or whatever. She
can't drive.
Fails a driving test. I'm sorry. Yes, that's correct. Right.
Yeah. Her good friend takes her popularity away from her because she's more important now for vapid
half a
reasons
minute,
again.
And then it's back.
And that's what's freeing about it is it's like, yeah, if you define yourself of like, okay, so now we're in all outright rebellion. I'm in war with Ty. I'm in war with the definitions of who can drive a car. That's stupid.
Sure.
If you just allow yourself to be free by saying, why am I allowing them to define what me and Ty's relationship is like? And obviously in the case of the car, she just has to learn things. But she comes to all these things with the realization that she's not allowing the definitions to determine things for her. She's just going to be better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, kind of. I just feel like I don't agree with all the characterizations. But you're not totally wrong at all. Like what you're saying is not wrong at all. It's just that like, I guess like I would agree with that if I thought the movie was executed a little bit better. But like again, because I think it's a writing and directing problem, because the movie sort of ultimately whitewashes any real consequences for her, except for the driver's test. It's like the one thing that does seem like a permanent consequence. It kind of doesn't matter how her self-realization goes. Like her self-realization is equally like she gets a applause and a sticker and a kiss for that, the same as if she had never had that realization.
There's a moment where she is giving to she's giving to charity, and she takes all her stuff, and they literally cheer for her, and she brings skis.
Sure.
And her dad's like, "What? Where are they skiing?"
Amazing
like,
joke.
What the fuck do you? Yeah, because Cher is dumb. She's a little bit dumb. Yeah, and she doesn't understand that poor people wouldn't use skis. But in her mind, she's decided that I don't need these skis. Why? Because someone doesn't have skis. So she is chosen to be. She's dumb, but she's chosen to be better.
Sure.
Like that is,
I agree.
To me, the most aligning. It means that anyone can do this.
That
like
part
that's
I agree
fantastic.
with. The fact that anybody can come to
doesn't mean if she's effective.
That's true.
Or if she. And the fact that they all cheer her on, they were cheering her on when she was doing what her version of debate as well.
Agreed.
So like when you point out,
I agree with that.
When you point out like she always succeeds, yeah, that's kind of the joke. Though.
But that's what ultimately makes it not an effective satire. Or maybe it makes it incredibly effective if the satire is nothing means anything. If the satire is nihilism, I agree.
That's not,
it is that.
No, that's not exact. It's not out of sorts of
not
what
exactly.
I'm saying, but it's not off.
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying is your previous definitions are not useful and need to be redetermined. That is kind of like saying the language we're speaking right now, we'll throw it out the window. So it is nihilism in that regard.
But you're the one that's putting the word language and label on it. You're putting the word language and label on it. And it's not that those are not the terms that the movie uses. That's a reading into it, which is fine. And I don't.
They use things like ads and music and
fuck me. No. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just saying that when we're putting that language onto this, it's like we're sort of rephrasing the idea of, is there anything that has meaning? And you're saying, well, it's only the labels anyway. And I'm saying, yeah, but I don't think the movie necessarily believes that. I just think it's accidentally saying that. I think that's what...
I don't know. It's so consistent. Why else would you do it? That's all you have as a director and like as a person who's showing images and sound to me. It's just like, keep showing me these same images. What am I going to deconstruct out of that? Well, it's that you're clearly saying a statement about that image. What's similar about these images? What's the pattern here? And that's what I came up with.
Well, but I don't think it's invalidating your theory, what I'm saying right now. I just think that we're coming to different conclusions about what it means. You know what I mean? Because what you're arguing for.
So what are you saying? What are you saying that? What are you saying exactly is different?
We've kind of run around a bunch of things, so it's hard to remember exactly what all the things that we were that we were debating.
But just pick one, let's say.
Just pick one, and we'll go with it.
We'll go with that one.
So I think the part that I'm objecting to the most is I'm objecting to the idea that this movie is effectively an argument against previous or other people's labels for meaning, and instead as I'm going to create my own meaning, right? Like you're making the case for kind of like an existentialist film. And I'm saying I don't think the movie is that thoughtful. I think the movie is actually...
It's just playing with types.
I think it is suggesting how the cyclical vapidness of things, the way that you're saying it is. We agree on that. Like your observations about what is happening, I totally agree with all of them. I just think that the movie isn't knowingly saying... And because you see how all these things are labels... You see how all these things are meaning indicators and they don't fit these people. They're rejecting them. I'm saying, no. I think the movie's saying, and I don't know if it's doing it consciously, it's applying all these different pastiches of meaning and then sort of exploiting them for tropes, but never really commenting on any of it.
Yeah, I see. That's why we have a problem talking about the stakes of it and why the stakes are important. Because it's not that... outright rebellion or rejection of something can just be ignoring it to me.
That's
and I think that's a little different from
that's
you.
Interesting.
Because if you just say I'm in rebellion against this capitalism, how are you in rebellion? I'm just going to choose not to do capitalism. And they're like, well, how are you going to do that? I'm going to figure it out. But that's an outright rebellion. I'm going to ignore it. And when it's so living and breathing and part of culture, how to become a teenager is, you kind of have no other space to play. So it's true that ignoring it is a form of outright rebellion to me. Now, more rebellion would be let's burn down the definitions of what it is.
Clearer rebellion.
And that's kind of what this is, a Hollywood version of that, which is kind of that's more to say than most movies my point is that it's saying to ignore these things, these definitions, to ignore these things that she thought were important, like the ads, the art and the culture that people are saying, like Christian says, it's a very important piece. Well, why the fuck is it important? You fucking Rat Pack throwback.
I agree with that. Yes.
No, because you don't know. You're just a kid. And you just like Spartacus because you're gay. It's fine. Those definitions are weird, and it's hard for a teenager to navigate that space. So it's easy. It's a great message to send to teenagers. Don't worry. Here's a North Star. Just accept, include, don't, and ignore definitions that no longer apply to you.
Boy, I you know what, man?
That's
I wish the movie was saying that. I don't think it is.
I think that's what it's saying, man.
I'm sorry. I do like that conclusion.
I don't need to prove it to you. That's what I saw in it. That's what I saw in it, and I was like, wow, that's more than I was going to give Clueless credit for.
Yeah, I just think I would need to see the hero make a decision to leave more accurately, to actually refuse to participate in the other things that give her labels, to see that in it. You know what I mean? That's the thing that's missing for me is she makes a decision to like, I'm going to do things that are actually nice that don't directly benefit me. Like that's really the movie's stakes on the surface. I'm going to do things that don't actually always benefit me, but then they do benefit her. And so that's why the movie feels like it doesn't have any stakes. But you're saying, well, that's actually a choice to not, you know what you're saying. I don't need to summarize it again. I do enjoy this argument though. I think it's fun because like it does boil down to like preconceived, like sort of, it's presuppositional, right? As all arguments are.
It's also exactly, I knew this is going to happen too. It's exactly how we both are very different.
Well, right.
You know, like our versions of ourselves, our avatars of ourselves that we have in our head. This speaks to like, you would not. You don't like you wouldn't like my theory, and I love my theory, and of course, like that's what I'm feeling. And reverse, you're like Abe's trying to spin this out to be something it's not. It all makes sense to me.
I do like the theory. That's not true. I do like it. The difference is that like I'm not saying I'm not accusing you of spinning.
Yeah. I don't mean you dislike it. I just mean that you're like it doesn't quite work on me, I guess is a better way to say.
See, when I look at it, I'm thinking like I just don't agree with this one conclusion about it. The rest of it I totally agreed with. But maybe that's just nitpicking. I am a nitpicking person. I do that all the time. That's not my best quality. My best quality is my beard.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong about things.
What's that?
I'll give you that. You're not usually not wrong about things.
Sometimes.
So I'll give you that.
Sometimes I'm wrong. It's also when I am wrong.
We're all human.
When I am wrong, it takes me forever to see that I'm wrong. It takes me so long to see that I'm wrong.
Well, just don't let culture's definitions of what right and wrong is define you.
I love it. See, actually, it's funny that you say that because to me, when I try to define the difference between us about this, the difference is fundamentally like I would like to see intentionality in the work. I want to see intentionality in the work. I want to see that the work says it. And I want to be able to see it in a way that is demonstrative and explainable. And I don't think you're as beholden to that. I think you're a little more free to read into it and say, like, yeah, I don't need it to always work for everybody. I just need it to work for me.
Which is so funny because all I do all day is spend time saying, like, this directorial mechanism of camera proves this. And formally, that is important because
but it's fundamentally
X,
a standard
Y, or Z.
It's a standard of proof.
Die Hard uses diagonal lines to determine speed. You know, like I'm fascinated with systems. This system, just so particularly, the end of that system is there is no God.
I knew that. Thank you, because you've named it. You've named exactly the thing. So. Yeah. You did a good job. Yeah. You named it exactly the thing. So, like, I agree that the movie's saying there is no God. But I just don't agree with the hope that you have applied to that because I don't think the movie's saying it. I do think that what you're saying,
maybe you're right.
By the way, what you're saying the movie says is a hope message for the way the movie believes the world to be. I would agree with it if it was in the movie. That's the only difference, is I don't think it's there. See, like there's...
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're not.
See, like a movie like A Prophet. Have you ever seen A Prophet?
Oh, yeah.
A Prophet's fucking awesome.
Good.
A Prophet is a movie that does kind of say what you're saying, right? It is. I mean, like we could go into a whole. It does.
Yeah,
say
that's true. It's a whole different. Yeah, it kind of has to deal with like how prison.
But
works.
also, like, it's a subculture full of labels
system.
And who belongs where and all that stuff, right? It's the same thing. So, like, what? Yeah. But like, I feel hopeful at the end of A Prophet. Do you feel hopeful at the end of A Prophet? I kind of did. I kind of not hopeful like it was good. Hopeful like I feel like, wow, that was a really meaningful, interesting exploration, and that's like
true.
And like it feels inspiring in some way. So like I'm not opposed to the message. I'm not opposed to it. I think you and I have different ideas about how do I say this? I think we have different ideas about how much authorial intent matters. I think we might have different ideas about that.
Yeah. I'd say that would be true. And I would ask you not to tell me my definition of authorial intent.
I'm not telling you what it is. No, I just think that they're different.
I know you're not. I'm just being a troll.
I love it. That's a good joke.
Yeah, no, I think that might be true. But that's something maybe we should work out
Should we?
amongst
No,
ourselves.
no. Let everyone listen to it. We're gonna talk about. We're gonna. No,
Okay.
we don't have to keep talking about it. I'm just joking around.
Maybe there'll be a part 2 where we'll rewatch Clueless and continue this conversation.
You know why this?
Or you'll find we'll watch
A Prophet
whatever.
is
I
too
don't
good
give
of a
fuck.
movie to
I
do
don't
for
make
this
the rules.
podcast. I think.
I don't make the rules.
No, but so it is a
except this
compliment
one.
to Clueless that Clueless it spawns this kind of an argument, because like there is a little bit of a Rorschach in that movie. You know, like there is. I'm not denying that at all. I think that's what makes it so good, is that like it was a really powerful reflection of America to America, and America didn't see that it was a problem.
Snapshot. Yeah. Yeah, it really is a picture of
Yeah, it
1995.
fucking is. That was your argument.
And it's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing because like I can see how TV does that all the time, but like for a movie which was made like in 1994 and then released in 1995, it was still super relevant.
I agree.
In 1995, and that's crazy. And it's still kind of relevant now if you do some mental gymnastics to like do like there's some parallels.
I think it's extremely important to see a movie like Clueless in 2020, because Clueless is, whether intentionally or not, a harbinger of what it's like for the wealthy versus the not wealthy. It's just that the not wealthy aren't there. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's what I was talking about. The sidelining that happens. That's just. We kind of have to bring it up with every film from the past forever.
But this
now.
one,
whenever the now
is absolutely guilty of it, because it's about that.
Oh yeah, it's about culture. It's asking you to. It's inviting the conflict, and that's rough. That's hard to shoulder as a director.
Well, and like we're all trapped in the time we're in. We're all saying and believing things now that are gonna look stupid in 20 years. That's just a fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, like
exactly.
If you think that you figured it all out, take a long look at history, my friend. Doubt that very much.
Yeah.
Doubt that very much. Yeah. Anyway, we did an hour and 50 minutes on
Something
Clueless.
will come up. Yeah, two white guys talking about a movie for white girls from 1995. You're welcome.
I hope that everyone I don't know, maybe the audience will tell us that they hate this. I kind of like that. I like when episodes get like when we get into the nitty-gritty of an argument. I hope you like it. I like it.
I like it. I think it's I like it. It's just funny to me because it's like well, that's something we're all figuring. Like, it's weird to me only because like that's something we all have to figure out for ourselves, and like, why are we broadcasting it? But as I say that, it's kind of cool to do that kind of stuff out in the open, because I think that that's how people should. They should. I've made mistakes now, and they're. I don't know if you.
I don't think you did make a mistake.
Or you've made mistakes, or who knows? Maybe this podcast will go into a time capsule into the future. But like, so when it comes down to it, I think it's good to do. Like this kind of stuff. We have the superpowers of like not giving a shit about it, or we have the privilege of not giving a shit about it. I don't even know. But the point is, we did it, and they heard it. It's happened, and now it's here, and tear us apart, or whatever, because that's why we put it out there.
The audience is welcome to tell us that they're not interested in the philosophical debate of meaning in movies as a part of Directorpiece. And I will listen to that, because I do understand that this podcast is fundamentally about filmmaking. But I can tell you that Abe and I, as a part of our relationship, this is a regular feature in our relationship.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm surprised it took this long.
Well, we did a little bit of it in Paranorman.
Yeah,
I know. I feel bad, dude. I hoped you wouldn't make that connection.
I'm like, oh, Mascazoro is great. Yes.
I feel bad now because I didn't want you to feel that way.
No, it's not. This is also a part of what we do. Is that I go out of my way to make fun of him. He never does that to me. He's a super nice guy. I always make you sound like you're an asshole. And then really what is happening is
we're just
I'm
playing
being
types.
an asshole. So,
We're playing types. I definitely live
I
under
love you,
the
buddy.
guise of an asshole for the sake of comedy, for sure.
I also live under a guy's asshole, so yeah.
Well done. Well done. That's my
you.
favorite of your many word twists. Love it. Well done.
All right. Good. That's a good one to end
I also
on.
live under a guy's asshole. Well done.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking to
Clueless,
me about Clueless.
Clueless is great.
About a theory I wrote. I really took a while to write this. Way too long. I cut.
I'm not even remotely surprised by that. I feel like you could have gotten into I could have heard a 3-hour spiel on this from you, and I wouldn't have been surprised.
I could have talked about the generational thing a lot more, but I wanted the music thing to be. Go watch Clueless and if you want some homework,
if you'd like
listeners,
that,
watch Clueless again and look at how the use of language. I'm not just talking about the as-ifs and the whatevers. Look how characters talk, and how they talk to each other, and how flexible they are at just knowing what the other person means, despite talking completely different languages.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of the things I probably should have mentioned, just because it's another feather in the hat of culture doesn't matter, people matter kind of assessment of things,
No, but that I actually really
just
like
watch
that.
it and come to your own conclusions.
That I like.
Yeah. It was really good. It's. I think she is actually.
I think we
really
should
good
do a
writer.
director piece that's on a soundtrack, because I think you could.
Yeah. I think there's movies that
if you were ever going to do an Empire Records director piece talking about what the soundtrack means, would be amazing.
Jesus. Yeah, I didn't talk about the shots of Clueless because they're not.
No, except for the first piece where she does some filmmaking, and then after that she kind of bails on it.
Yeah, and then there's a quote of 2001's.
Yeah.
I pointed those out, but that's
Definitely
not why
not.
you talk about Clueless. What you talk about is you
Definitely
talk
not.
about this. This is what Clueless is about. I don't know. I really liked it. I love the three girls' relationship. I think it's a super effective thing.
I agree with that.
Of that generation.
We enjoyed,
and we need another Clueless for this generation that applies to update.
I would love to see
updated.
that.
Like Emma.
I would love to see a Clueless for now. I would love to see that.
I think that it's got to be
Agreed.
done. I think it'll happen eventually, but should happen every 20,
just
30
where
years.
are we now? Agreed.
Yeah, let's make a teen comedy that actually matters, is relevant to teens. Isn't just a 40-something-year-old.
But it would have to be in public school now, right? It couldn't be with it wouldn't be the upper class like this.
Yeah. I mean, we're in a dark time now. It was also a dark time when this is a kind of dark time where they're about to be in a dark time
in '96,
or at least white people didn't know it yet. But because now we're gonna move into the TRLs and the Britney Spears and it's all gonna break apart. The illusion is gonna shatter.
And then finally they will summon their final form, Paris Hilton.
And then 20 years later, there's gonna be rioting in the streets. So it's kind of it's a picture.
It truly is.
And that's an episode.
It is. If you've stuck around this long, you must be a fan of Small Beans. But if you happen to have stuck around this long, engaged by our many word quibbling and masterpiece illuminating dialogue pieces, you can find more of this, not exactly this, but other things like it on the Small Beans channel by going to patreon.com/smallbeans. If you have a couple of bucks, we'll take them. We'll take those bucks from you and make some more podcasts if you'd like that. We have a few, so we'll take it.
Yeah.
We'd love it.
Thank you for
bet.
Thank you for doing that, Adam. And you can find I'm Abe Epperson. You can find me at Abe the Mighty on Twitter.
You can find me on Twitter at The Real Gans with a Z. Other places, props.
And next episode will probably be a U Jam. Where you talk.
You're gonna have a fucking knife ready for me one of these days, and I deserve it at this point. You're gonna get
ready for it. You're gonna have to count your sleeping hours.
Great. I hope I did.
All right. Good talking to you,
Love you,
man.
buddy. Talk
Love
soon.
you, man.
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you.